Χαίρετε ο φίλοι. I'm Fletcher from amindfullanguage.com, and you're listening to Greeking Out, a podcast for ancient and Koine Greek learners full of tools, tips, and possibly tirades on learning Greek using comprehension-based methods. If that isn't familiar to you, check out episode 0, the manifesto, for more info. In this interview, I'm talking with Lee, but you probably know him better as Leandros. He's one of the two people behind the Ancient Greek podcast. Lee didn't start out learning Greek in formal classes. He started through language exchanges or intercambios. We talk about the importance of motivation and community to language learning, being comfortable being uncomfortable, and the importance of patience and recognizing that language learning is like being on a journey. Let's get started. Okay, well, Lee, thank you for agreeing to do the interview. It's great to have you.
Hi, how's it going, Fletcher?
Good.
Yeah, great to be here.
We were discussing before we started we started recording about names and how, like, I think both of us have a name that's not easily inflected in Greek. So, I've used Gregorios in some things, and you did Leandros, which, is, I guess, an interesting thing for people who want to start getting into communicative Greek is, what do you do what do you call yourself?
Yeah, it's important, isn't it? Because I think, obviously, you don't have to have a name in the language. But in a modern language classroom, a lot of language learning is kind of role playing.
Right.
So, and a name to some extent can be fantasy, but I think that name's kind of started as a joke, for reasons you explained, just like you need a name that declines. So that's the closest I could get, because Lee is like Lee Andros, Lee the man. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's, and again, like I said, I had no idea what your actual name was because, I've known you from your podcast and from Twitter. So then, it's like, well, Leandros. Okay, so what's your name? Like, what do I call you in English on the podcast, I guess? So,
that's it. Yeah, yeah. So just Lee. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I've lived in some places before where like Fletcher is hard to pronounce. So I have like different names I use there and stuff just because. That, so it's anyway.
Because I live in Spain, Barcelona, and I do a similar thing because obviously I don't need to adopt a Spanish name, but like back engineering from Leandros, like Leandro is a Spanish name, so like and the great thing is I also get a name day. I've never had a name day, so now I've got one.
Nice.
There's a Hagios Leandros somewhere. I don't know.
Okay, well, that's cool. Yeah, traditions and things around names and stuff is always interesting to me, and how people get them and stuff. But I guess that's maybe a little bit off topic.
Yeah, that's it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Lee, so tell me, how did you get into Greek? What got you started?
Yeah, I've been listening to some of the podcasts you've done, and it's kind of, in a way, the opposite process of most people. I get the impression a lot of people started they went to university and studied it, the old-fashioned way, grammar, translation kind of thing, and then gradually started using it more as an active language kind of thing. I started kind of the opposite. That at university I wasn't originally studying Greek at all, but I had Greek friends at university. And so I just kind of got into it kind of casually, at first. And it was kind of a gradual thing. But I saw that a lot of my friends at university had the experience, living abroad, going to another country, learning another language. And, because I just studied at university in my own country, I hadn't had that experience. So pretty much when I finished university, that's what I wanted to do. So I went abroad. I came here. I live in Barcelona. I'm from Leicester in the UK, by the way. But I started just picking up a bit of Greek here and there, modern Greek, and also Spanish, because I had a lot of Spanish friends at university. It's partially how I ended up here in Barcelona. But just gradually picking it up and transitioning from modern languages to ancient ones. In England, I would never have considered that. just a monolingual English guy. I mean, I don't know what it's like in the United States, but like I was a typical English guy. I mean, we have a basic level of French or something. Is it similar in the United States?
It's probably that everyone has some interaction with Spanish. I would say that's probably the number two spoken language here. But I mean, you know that joke. It's like, well, what do you call someone who speaks three languages? Triglot. What's someone, trilingual? What's somebody who speaks two? Bilingual. What's someone who speaks one? An American. It's that.
Yeah, I mean, it is a stereotype. I mean, because I think most countries, people speak all sorts of different things. There's more people between cultures than like there are no borders as such, are there, culturally or linguistically? But I think, like in Britain, we do have other languages, but they're so minority, Welsh or other things. But I pretty much living in England, I didn't have much of a linguistic background, so that came when I went to live abroad, and just gradually transitioned, progressed from modern languages to ancient languages. Maybe progress, maybe went backwards, but. But I think it's because of that process. Like, it never occurred to me, like to do it. Like I've heard a lot of people, when they have their university experience of grammar and what. Obviously, you do. It's a false thing that you don't do grammar or something when you learn a language actively. Obviously, it's involved, but it's not the main aspect. But I just I think there's the culture here in Barcelona. Just I think learning any language actively, whether it's modern or ancient, you have to be proactive to find people. And I'd already been part of a community of people doing that with modern languages. Like, obviously, like here in Barcelona, a lot of people do like intercambios. It's just language exchanges. So I'm English, and Barcelona, we have Catalan and Spanish. So I was meeting people and just going out for a drink, hanging out on a patio, having a coffee, and just practicing these languages. So I think when I transitioned into doing I just thought of like Latin as it's basically just old Spanish. But I think it's because we've got multiple versions, like there's Italian and Portuguese and the others too. So you can't call any one of them for identity politics. This one is ancient, it's ancient Spanish or ancient Italian. Well, it's both. It's all of them. But I think I just thought of it that way, and I didn't find a group of people doing ancient Greek here. But a big step for me was finding people like there's a circle of Latinists here. It's Circulos Latinos Barcinonensis, and I mean my Latin. Firstly, it's like worse than my Greek. I'm like the worst Latinist in that group. I hesitate to call myself a Latinist, but I think just being in that environment. I think it's important learning any language is like to be, I don't know if that makes sense, but to be comfortable out of your comfort zone, because I'd have that experience of like being the idiot in the room, and just absorbing things and listening and what's going on.
Well, and that's a really important skill for any kind of language learning, modern or otherwise. But I think maybe perhaps for people who have done grammar translation, it might be harder because maybe that's like I would say for myself, there's this feeling of like I've been doing this language for a decade or more. I should be able to communicate in it, and I don't want to look like the idiot in the room because I have so much background. But there's a difference, I think, transitioning that sort of grammar translation knowledge and reading knowledge into active use. I mean, that takes some, you're having to start to process the language in a whole new way. So I'm actually really glad to hear from you because I think it's cool for people who now have the ability, there's more resources now and more opportunities to skip the years of tedium in a grammar class and start with an active approach as well. So I was saying to somebody after one of my previous interviews, like I really want to find somebody who's started with a more active approach. This is fantastic.
Yeah, I mean that was it because later on I did go to do it the traditional way. I think it's also important, important, but interesting, and to have that experience of being in a traditional classroom, and so later I did do that. Like I've been here in Barcelona for a few years, picking up the languages, And before I get to that, like I basically did what we were doing with Curriculus Latinus. I just tried to find people locally that were doing Greek. You don't need a huge community of people.
Sure.
So through the Latin circle, I found some people, because they were also doing Greek, but it's less obvious. But I found people. But getting on to what you were saying, I eventually, after I've been doing this casually for a few years, like, okay, maybe I should take it more seriously. And, so I did a master's in classical studies. It's not primarily philology based. It's general classics. You do a bit of everything, archaeology, a bit of linguistics too. But yeah, great experience. But I think it's not the main thing for me. It was great. I had great, inspiring tutors. It was an amazing experience. But I think, as I say, I think that was always secondary to actually just trying to find a community of people. We can do that online, right? But also offline. I mean, if you live in a town, maybe it's not so easy. But a big cosmopolitan city like Barcelona, I can pretty much. You don't need a big community. A few people is enough, and I think that's really positive because, like, we found a few people. Obviously, Joseph, right, from the podcast. I mean, that's how I found him. Like we both just live locally, and it kind of went from there.
Okay, well, that's really cool. Yeah, and I guess how do you find those? How do you find people locally? Because like there's plenty of language exchanges. So you want, like, for us, me, like I live about an hour outside of Richmond, Virginia. So if I wanted to find a French or a Spanish language exchange, that's trivial. Just meetup.com and there's something going. But I don't think I've ever seen one posted for ancient Greek, or maybe even Latin for that matter.
Do it yourself. Yeah, you never know. You never know who's out there. I mean, this is how I found. This is how I found Joseph. He lives literally like 3 blocks from where I am. Obviously, you're not going to come across someone in the street, are you? Right. But for sure, I think any minority language, there's going to be somebody, and yeah, with the internet you can find them. So yeah, there's just like a platform that was, I think it's like a Spanish website called Clases Particulares, and it's mainly for teachers trying to find students. But I just put an ad there, like, and I thought, probably no one's going to answer, but I did manage to get. You don't need a big community; a few people is enough. Like I got in touch with Joseph. It's inevitable. Some people come and go, but really interesting, positive experiences. Like one guy we were doing a modern Greek, ancient Greek intercambio, language exchange, because he wasn't a Greek guy; he was a Spanish guy. But he spent time in Greece. His Greek was really good. So that was a very different type of experience. And there were a few of us who were interested in like me and interested in philosophy and just wanted to learn ancient Greek just to read Plato and stuff. So I think because these people already had backgrounds in linguistics, so I can understand how it might not be a bit more difficult for someone just if they don't have that background. You need a teacher or something to kind of guide you on that way. But I think you don't have to do one or the other. I think taking classes and also doing other things complement each other. It's just how proactive you are outside of class. Like I would say, yes, take courses, but that's the minimum. It's what you do outside of class that will define how far you get.
And that's true for even any modern language you're taking too. It's like an hour. I mean, even in a university setting where you might have class 5 days a week, but like 5 hours a week in a classroom setting is probably not going to get you very far. And then the class finishes in a semester or 2, or possibly you have maybe you have 4 semesters of requirements. Well, 2 years later, if you quit, you're done. You'll never progress any farther if you're not working on it yourself. So that's definitely true.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you have to be. I mean, it depends how far you actually are interested in taking it. Because some people, like I started quite casually. I had Greek friends at university. I was kind of curious. Just one of my friends. We used to sit up all night drinking coffee and talking about philosophy, and he ended up teaching me the alphabet. And it kind of went step by step from there. I do have a bit of a background in modern Greek. I think that's also important, but at some stage you do have to choose, going one way or the other. I mean, you can do both. I don't separate the languages as some people might choose to do, but I think it's everyone is their own journey. Which direction they go or which period they kind of focus on. But it's like, do you look at the global language, or do you focus in one area or one time period? So that's not easy, but I think everyone's got their own path, and it's a lifetime, like I don't see it as as you were saying, it's unrealistic, I think, to expect people to come out of university and like that's it, it's what we do outside the classroom that counts, right? For those of us who are motivated to do that, because to me, I never started in a classroom. I was always just part of a community of language speakers, and I knew Greeks locally here and other people doing Latin, and it just kind of grew out of that.
So I think there may have been one or two other people who've been on here that know some modern Greek that I've interviewed. But how much help do you find that when you're looking at an ancient text and you say you encounter a word that you wouldn't necessarily definitely know from ancient Greek? Do you ever find that to be like that ability to communicate in modern Greek helpful for figuring out what's going on?
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, they kind of inform each other. I mean, I hesitate to say each other as if they're separate things. Yeah, but I mean, for sure. All languages change, right? But I think to a certain extent, it purely from a reading perspective, you can recognize a lot, and it goes back and forth. I mean, my modern reading is very basic because now I have kind of gone down the ancient Greek route, but a lot of ancient Greek also helps with modern Greek. So I think they both inform each other. But again, I just see it as more than learning something. It's the motivation and being part of an active community of people helps with motivation. I can imagine myself at a university setting in the UK, because I did that. I forgot to mention, I also did a course at Durham that was full on, old style Greek in the grammar translation kind of method. And again, that was a positive experience, but I don't think living in England, I would have been motivated to do that because, I don't know, living in England, I would be like, let's learn Old English or something.
Right.
So it's like my kind of cultural environment that kind of influences me, and living in. I mean, I don't live in Greece. What's it got to do? Some people might think, what's it got to do with Spain? But I don't think of it so much as like the modern borders of the countries. Barcelona, for example, it's on the coast next to what's it called? Emporias. It's a Greek colony, and it's an amazing place. So I just see myself as living in that kind of Mediterranean world, and I'm interested in all the cultures of that world, including the languages. But to some extent, you end up pursuing one over another. My Latin and my Spanish too. My Spanish and Catalan have also suffered because I've in the last couple of years I've been focusing on pushing my Greek, but that's just natural. I think we have to be realistic about what we can expect to achieve, but I think it's important what motivates you to do something, and I think maybe in England I wouldn't be motivated. I mean, I'm sure living in London or something, I would be able to find people who speak even ancient Greek, or well, maybe not speak it, but have some background in it, or actual Greek speakers. I don't like saying modern Greek, actual Greeks.
Yeah.
But I'm sure I could do that the same as I do here. But I think it's living in Barcelona that gave me the kind of cultural background to kind of proactively go out and do intercambios with other people. And as I say, if I were ever to go back to the UK, the first thing I would do is look for intercambios with other people. Leicester's a small city, is where I'm from, but not so small that you wouldn't find somebody. So I think that's what I miss because I think the UK is it's you get, especially Leicester, you get a great multicultural environment. You meet people from lots of different places, but not so much multilingual. I mean, obviously within individual communities, people speak different languages, but not crossing over. Like it's kind of expected that, if different communities are speaking to each other, they're kind of using English. But I think it's one thing I think is good with like me and Joseph, like because we both come from different language backgrounds. He's Spanish, Catalan, I'm English, and yeah, we speak each other's languages. But I think it's because we don't have a common native language. There's no reason for us to be speaking either English or Spanish. Like, so I think it encourages us to do that.
Yeah. So in that relationship dynamic, Greek is just another of languages on equal footing that you could interact in.
Sure. Yeah. Because it's how it started. When I was trying to do the same thing with Latin.
Yeah.
And the Curculus Barcinonensis, the Barcelona Latin Circle. I mean, they do that. They use all active methodology in the class. I mean, I'm not sure to what extent they do that in their actual classrooms, but certainly they do that in the circle. And I think, as bad as my Latin is, me being there kind of, because a lot of them, like they have Catalan as their common language. So, I don't think it's a crime, to revert to your first language. Sometimes you need to say something. But I think because they thought, like, Lee doesn't understand any Catalan, I do. But I think because Catalan is also a second language to me, just as much as Latin. So, it's an effort to speak one or the other. So why not just make the effort?
Stick with Latin.
Yeah, that's it. So, my Catalan is quite basic, the same as my Latin, but it's a process. I think we have to be realistic. It's a process, and I'm always just aware of just not being hard on myself. Like, bit by bit. Hopefully,
so
I'm getting better.
Just to help provide some context, how long how long ago was that you started just going to these language exchanges, and even, like you said, casually with your friend teaching the alphabet? Like, how many years has that been to get from there to where you are now?
Well, so I've maybe been in Barcelona over 10 years now. So I was starting off, with Spanish and Catalan, and I wasn't picky. Like I was living with, as I said, trying to be proactive. I was living with Spaniards, but like through attrition, people coming and going from the flat, I ended up living with Italians. But why not? I just see it as an opportunity to learn a bit of Italian. I'm not going to become fluent, but I pick it up, and so it's only, I'm not sure, maybe the last 5 years I started doing Greek stuff. I mean, seriously, as I said, it's been a little bit here and there over since I was at university, maybe, I don't know, 15 years ago. So that was when I was just picking up bits here and there. But I didn't start seriously studying it until maybe, I lose count, but 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah, it's when I last went to Greece to visit Costas. Costas is my friend, by the way, that kind of inspired me to do this in the first place.
Well, I think it's really helpful because, there's a lot of people who want to do Greek that maybe they had it in, university, or if they're maybe in a, kind of a ministry, Christian ministry position, they had it in seminary or something like that. And, that was years ago and they kind of dropped it, but then it's exposure. And then, maybe it's you come back and then they could start again, kind of building on that foundation. And then, it's probably like you said, realistically, it's a multi-year investment, which requires motivation, which you said. It sounds like in your story that was provided by having that community and language exchanges to both learn from, but also just provide the motivation to keep going.
Absolutely. That's it. Motivation is key. I mean, what motivates me might be different for other people. I'm not saying everyone. I mean, because not everyone has the chance, to go and live abroad. Gap year, it doesn't have to be forever. I never decided to live abroad. I mean, is it permanent? Maybe 10 years, maybe
Right.
kind of permanent now. But it started as kind of like, let's just see how this goes, and but life happens. So I think, but wherever we live, if we're in a major city, I mean, I don't know how big it is where you live. If it's London or New York, I'm sure you'll find somebody, and you just push each other.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's true. And definitely major cities around the world are definitely going to have those opportunities for exchanges and things. And I mean, even like in my case, I live in a rural county, but I have a gigabyte per second internet connection, so I can have virtual meetups, or I know a couple of people that we might actually know mutual acquaintances from Twitter that are probably an hour away. So I could theoretically could meet up with them and things like that. So I guess if you are motivated, you can build that community even if you're not in the ideal city or location.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the internet. I mean, the internet's great, isn't it? Like to really get in touch with, because it doesn't matter where you are. And I know there are people that do like now, like Zoom meeting. For example, now Joseph now lives in Berlin, but we just continue on Zoom. So it doesn't matter that he's now moved there. So whatever people's circumstances, but primarily find what motivates you to learn a language, because I think it's difficult to separate languages and cultures, and it's like, yes, what aspects of the culture motivate you. I mean, yes, I'm interested in reading all the different types of stuff, but primarily I think both me and Joseph, it's like the philosophy type stuff. I mean, I started wanting to read Aristotle and Plato. Like at university, I was just reading them in translation, and like never occurred to me like maybe one day I'll read the original.
Yeah, well, and that makes sense. And I think about learning a language, and being that I'm living in my native country where everyone around me speaks English, like any other language I'm picking up, it's okay, well, what can I do with this? And like, I would love to be able to read Homer in the original. Like that would just be fun. So like that's one of the things that I keep pushing for, is I want to get better to the point that I can go pick up Homer or the plays or something like that and read it. So having, like you've said, having motivation and having community support to maintain that motivation, I think is really important.
Yeah, and that's what we do. I mean, like me and Joseph, is how our podcast started, because we didn't. I mean, primarily, it's not a podcast. It was just us meeting. We just read together, paraphrase as far as we could what we'd read, and also translating sometimes. We're not against translating or anything. Sometimes it's like that. But the podcast was basically just kind of sharing our process, because maybe other people might find it useful, maybe not. But just sharing that process, and just each week going through a short passage in a book. I mean, like you, I'm also interested in reading Homer and whatever, but I'm also realistic about what we can expect. I mean, we have this running joke in the podcast, look, we're not poets.
Yeah.
And that's true because, but we do have an interest in reading that stuff. But we're just realistic that it's part of a process, and we're just on the journey. I mean, what's his name? I've got it here. Where is he? Cavafy? I don't know if you know that guy. He's a modern Greek poet.
No.
And this is one poem. I'm not going to read it, but one poem. It's called the To Proto Skali, the first step, right? And it's really inspiring. Basically, he just kind of says that, like there's this guy who's really unhappy because he spent his whole life trying to learn poetry and stuff, and he's only ever got to the first stage. And this other guy just basically tells him, but you should be proud of that. Most people don't even get to the first step. The first step is it's a great advancement. So I kind of see it like that. With me and Joseph, we've only been doing this a few years. We see ourselves as pretty much on the first step, and we've got our whole lives to develop this. The same with my other languages. I'm just on the way. And I think English too, I'm also learning English. When I read The Guardian or something, like, well, what word's that? No one knows everything, right? So it's always a process, and that's beautiful.
Well, and I like that what you're saying about your and Joseph's model about how you started off like reading a passage together and essentially discussing it in Greek as far as you could, right? I mean, that's it's probably a really good way, especially for people who maybe have some background and want to start getting more active, is to have a text you can discuss together, because then you don't have to necessarily remember all the words because you've got them on the page. At least some of the things you're going to talk about is right there in the text itself. And that's might be a useful approach for somebody who's trying to figure out how to do a language exchange or how to practice.
Oh, sure, yeah. It's what basically when we were doing the same with Raimundos, is the guy from Ramon. It's the guy from the Curculus Latinus, and like just a short text. And what's more important is what's not in the text. I mean, the same goes for course books. The course book, yeah, you can self-study. I mean, I self-studied Athanasde and everything before I actually went to Durham and did a course there. And there they were doing, is it Reading Greek?
Okay, the JACT book.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that one. But more than that, just interacting with it to whatever limited extent you can. I mean, that's fine, and it accumulates, and it can be good if you have an experienced teacher who can prompt you. I mean, but even if you don't, to some extent, you can do things. Just like be realistic. Take a simple text, either if something written by a modern classic scholar, or whatever, Xenophon or the New Testament, a short section, and you can just interact with that. I mean, this is the authentic thing of interacting with the text, and also, talking about the grammar, because Greek has grammatical terminology, so there's no reason we can't talk about the grammar also in Greek. I mean, I forget exactly where, but there's you can probably find it online. There's like some PDF I found of like how to actually talk about grammar in Greek, because there's no reason to use the Latin forms. I mean that's what like they do in Lingua Latina, the Familia Romana thing. So the interaction with the language couldn't just be as simple as, this is in the nominative or whatever. But again, it accumulates. It takes time, and just interacting with something is really important. But finding simple texts, as you said, like I think now that there's more stuff available, beginners stuff, I think we still have I hesitate to say a problem, but like it's that stereotype of bridging the gap, like from the kind of textbook kind of simplified Greek to actual authentic texts. But I think there are people who are starting to do stuff like that. I forget that guy's name. There's a guy who wrote some like Greek novellas. Is it like Kataskopos? And there was you read that one?
Yes, I own a paper copy which I lent to someone and has wandered off to Michigan, which is 600 700 miles from me. So
you've disseminated it. Great.
Yeah, so disseminate. But that's a great example because the authors made the PDF available for free. So you can get a print copy for $7 or $8, probably £3 or £4 on Amazon, a couple of euros, or you can just get the PDF and read it. And it starts off really simple, and it's the PDF is formatted so the sentences aren't that long, so it's not like you open up Plato's Republic and you're faced with a solid page of text in funny characters. It's like, well, there's plenty of white space, so it's a pretty approachable book, I think, if I remember correctly.
It doesn't scare people off, and I mean, I think like for anyone who's done Athanasde and reading Greek, and maybe there's that, was it Alexandros Hellenikon Paidion?
Which is a simplification of Rous's Greek Boy at Home, or Rouse, however you say his name.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's important. I think it's like to encourage people to produce more of this kind of stuff, because I myself am trying to write my own Greek novella, because this guy inspired me, like, and it's, as I say, maybe I'm an Aristotelian in this sense. It's like learn through doing, like I just realize how little I know when I sit down and try and produce it myself. And obviously, there's it's the same in any language. Like you have vastly more passive vocabulary. Sorry, you have way more passive vocabulary than active, what you can actually use. It's natural that that would be the case. But I think it's going through that process and, and being humbled by, actually I can hardly produce anything, and then just going through the process and realizing how little I actually can produce, but then that curiosity to try and find out about it. And I mean, you can just pick up a dictionary and do that. You can find, I'm just curious about how to say some expression and like, but another thing is just, obviously, I mean, it's a stereotype, isn't it? But, that whatever output you can do is based on how much input you've got. So, yeah, we do need to read a lot, both challenging ourselves with moderately authentic text, but we also need these, other texts. So, I mean, this guy is Maybell's Gerber, I think it is.
Okay.
I mean, his website, it's his blog, I think, it's Bibliotheca Factorum, and he's got another one. Is it Leucanthia and Meridax?
That's right.
Great.
I think at one point I downloaded, I just like saved it as an HTML file and then took. Are you familiar with the Altheos reading tools?
Oh, I have no idea.
So it's an electronic tool that you can add to a website in Greek, and it then gives you, if you right click or long tap a word, it'll give you a definition for it and try to parse it and stuff. So I grabbed his thing and like edited the HTML in there so I could try to struggle through it. But
whoa, great! But it's great because like pretty much anybody who's struggled through Athanasde or reading Greek or whatever would be able to approach those texts.
Yes.
And to some extent they may be graded, like someone who has background in linguistics or philology, and like, Athanasde, it's not designed as a novel. It's teaching grammar in each reading section.
Right.
But my novel isn't like that. It's just me doing the best I can to learn the language. And hopefully at some stage, I mean, I've got my blog where I put a few bits that I'm writing. But again, I think it's important is what I say. I mean, what we say in the podcast, like, ute Helenis, ute didaskaloi esmen. We don't profess to be authorities on the subject. We're just people out in the world. I think it's what people forget often with any language. The vast majority of people are going to be non-experts out in the world, imperfectly practicing languages. If you go on Twitter, there's going to be a vast amounts of people imperfectly using English or any language. I mean, when I first got on Twitter, like I was doing the same with Spanish. I was interacting with Spanish people. My social media was only to practice languages. So that's basically my Twitter now is just to practice Greek. And that's how I justify, like it's, people always say about social media, like it's a waste of time, right? Well, to what extent? I think if I'm proactively focused on, I'm only going to do it in Greek or, whichever language I happen to be learning at the time, then it's not a waste of time. It's interacting with people who know the language better than me.
Yes.
And I can learn from them. And I think I think it's the thing of, being comfortable out of your comfort zone, and also like being the idiot in the room, like when either at a Spanish party, and that's just my problem. I have to pick it up, right? But the same with the Latin circle, I always try to put myself in a circumstance where, I'm with people who know more than me, so I can only benefit from that. So hopefully I can also provide something for others, but with caveats, like I'm learning.
Well, and that's the great thing about Twitter is don't have to be accepted to follow someone. So like you can find some really great speakers and users of ancient Greek and just follow their accounts. And even if you never say a word, you're still getting, you know, at least somewhat comprehensible input from someone who's a little farther down the journey than you might be at that time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I see the same with, you know, Latin. Like people are always like, don't copy my Latin because I'm
Right.
Because, but to some extent, we're all learners, and you know, but it's that kind of like, at what stage do you suddenly become like competent? I don't think. I think if I were to do that, I would never actually publish anything. I would never, yeah.
Right.
Maybe it's a thing in old-fashioned style classics of, you know, like people are intimidated, like making mistakes and stuff. I don't think that's the case anymore, but I mean, maybe there are some people that still have that kind of culture in their background. But I think, you know, like it's important just to, you know, get out there and yes, make mistakes, but it's part of the process. But if you're part of a community, maybe you're all just making mistakes, right? And you're just copying each other's mistakes. But usually, you know, in these circles, there are people that do have backgrounds in linguistics that, to some extent, we can correct each other. But again, I stress that, you know, the speaking and the writing are not important in themselves. Like, and one thing I've noticed is just as much as my writing or speaking skills are imperfect, they've really driven my comprehension of the texts. And let's face it, you know, what we're focused on is to read this stuff, right? So, and it's also our focus with the podcast. You know, I mean, yes, occasionally it's, yeah, everyone can talk about anything they like, right? But our focus has always been, we've got a text, and we're going to kind of simplify and paraphrase it as far as possible to help ourselves primarily, but maybe others also, to engage with a text that might be higher level, but, you know, putting it into simplified. I think, what is it, the I forget what they're called. Is it the Paideia Institute or something? They produced something recently. It was like Homer, and they had a paraphrase. I don't think it was like a modern, I don't think anyone nowadays had done it. Like they'd found an old text or something from the 19th century, and they just had a paraphrase alongside the original poetry. And so that it's a step on the way to reading the original Homer, and, you know, and reading Greek mythology in simplified Greek. They do the same in Latin, right?
Yeah, and that's, you know, I think if we, as you've been talking about, you know, speaking and writing and stuff, and I think as long as the communities, you know, recognizes the caveats, there's no point in beating down someone and say, oh, you know, their Greek is not that good, or, you know, whatever. It's like, well, they're contributing to this community that's starving for resources. So, you know, if their Greek bothers you, then go do better yourself, you know?
Yeah.
Contribute something.
I mean, I want to, encourage people, like, because, you know, if someone like me can do it, like, I'm sure there's people that can do far better. I mean, there are people that are doing far better. Like, you interviewed Andreas the other week, right? And that the other guy he does a podcast with, Jacobos, is it?
Yeah, and Seamus McDonald.
Yeah, and you know, they're actually doing it. So I think it's great to have that. But again, you know, like, what's the motivation? I mean, everyone's motivated differently. We all have different backgrounds. We can all contribute in different ways. But I would say, you know, what we do, it's a kind of model of what people can do themselves. And maybe you're not just going to listen to us and instantly get better. But if you kind of model that process with somebody, I mean, because I'm only speaking from my own experience, but, you know, like, me and Joseph have both noticed that, you know, our understanding of, I hesitate to say high level text, you know, intermediate stuff like, I don't know, Plato, or how do you grade these things? I don't know. And we're still shy of doing Homer, but, you know, that's natural, it's poetry. But we're aware of that, and we're always, I mean, very quickly we've been able to comprehend stuff better than we would have done just translating or whatever.
I love I like the way Paul Nation kind of describes the different skills. And so one of the ones that I think we forget about is fluency development. And so like, even as you said, conversations, repeated use of, maybe similar language over and over again, that just helps develop comfort and facility with what you already have. And then when you go to tackle the next thing, you're no longer struggling with that. So you have the ability to comprehend new things more easily because you've got a solid foundation in the things you've already learned. And that kind of sounds like that's what's been happening with you and Seth, is that you nail down the stuff you're working on as you go about it and talk about it. And then when you go to the next thing, it's like, well, I can understand it better because I'm more comfortable with all this stuff. The other cool thing is you guys are doing philosophy, right? Like a lot of your talks are centered around, Socrates or, a particular work of a philosopher. And then Andrew and Seamus are doing, kind of just chatting about stuff. So like there's, a little more like conversation. I mean, yours is conversation. Theirs is sort of like, what's going on, what's the weather like, stuff like that. So like if you can kind of get a model for one kind of language from them, a different one from you. So now we just need to get some people dialoguing about Homer and just get different meetup groups to do podcasts about different eras in Greek literature, and we'll be good to go.
Okay. I mean, because as I said, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff happening on the internet that I know nothing about. I'm sure there are other groups, because I'm more focused, locally in Barcelona, and I do know some people online, but I'm sure there's all sorts of things going on that I know nothing about. But yes, all of those things contribute, and I think what those other guys are doing is great because I think their podcast is more I don't know, but I get the impression that what they do is more spontaneous, just press record and see what happens. I don't know to what extent they plan it. Our podcast is more kind of just a kind of consolidation of what we do in our initial Sun Hodos, our initial meeting. So we'll just go for a text together, and then when we do the podcast, it's basically just like a dialogue, and we just kind of go through the text and like what's important vocab, and just, as you say, try to just get that repetition with some basic vocab, but also more high level words that maybe are not so clear, and doing that kind of false kind of ironic, what does that word mean, Joseph? And then we kind of paraphrase a word, because that's what we actually do when we're there, because when we actually meet, we have a dictionary, or is it Perseus, and we're clicking on the button, seeing the translation, and then like, how can I paraphrase what that word is in Greek, although I've seen the translation. So I'm not against translating, like sometimes there's some word, but I mean it's good to try and make that effort to paraphrase it in simple Greek, but I mean it's important to get that there's nothing difficult about vocabulary as such, it's just frequency, right? So you start with low frequency. I mean, it's what is it Familia Romana does. It's just like the first unit, it's just like the verb to be over and over and over.
Yep.
And then you get like reading Greek or Athanasde, and it's like stenasde, flege, and like what are these like low frequency verbs doing here? But again, I don't want to criticize those resources, because I also think that it's not what's in the text. I think it's I don't know what goes on in actual classes, but I would assume if these texts were taught actively, the teacher would be doing that. I mean, it's always what's not in the text is what is actually going on in the classroom. So yeah, an actual teacher who's experienced in active methodologies will just be repeating the same verb. Dikiopolis groans. Like, do you groan? Does he groan? Does she groan? We groan. Just giving it that repetition with different forms, and learning the forms that way. And I mean, there are people doing it, like what's her name, Angela, Alpha with Angela, is it?
Alpha with Angela,
and they, I don't know how many episodes she's got now, like 20 odd episodes or something.
I think 25 just dropped, and 26 is in the works. So
great, yeah. So I mean, it's not verb based. I've noticed like she's done the verb to be and stuff, but she's yet to even get to the stage where she's teaching individual verbs. Like she's not got to groan or carry the rocks out of the field.
Yeah.
But again, it's part of a process. I mean, at some stage, I was thinking of doing something similar to what she's doing, but she's doing it so well. You don't need someone like me having a go at that. And I respect her so much because it's so much work to put that type of thing together.
Yes. Yeah, no, I've had similar thoughts sometimes, but it'd be really cool to make this thing. And it's like, well, I know I could never do an alpha with Angela kind of thing because I don't have the time and video editing skills and all that to do that. But I think, like you're doing, you have a podcast, which is something you can listen to on the go, and that contributes greatly. And especially you and Joseph, your rate of speech is slow enough that it's easy for people, beginners and things to follow. So that's another really great, great piece of that. Not just the method of discussing, texts and things, but just, again, really, really helpful.
Yeah, we are kind of semi-conscious of, are we teaching? Are we learning? Is it kind of a balance in the middle? And we're kind of semi-conscious of being intelligible. I mean, that's obviously why we go through Erasmian pronunciation. I don't like to get into what I call meta issues, quote unquote, about methodology or pronunciation. But I don't like Erasmian either. But it's kind of just simple, clear, and I mean, I'd love to read in modern Greek. I mean, we had a bit of a joke about this. That, if you got the text in front of you, I mean, I listen to people on YouTube recite. I mean, there's amazing resources for this. If you actually get into Greek people doing it, there's amazing resources. Like some guy has recited the entire Old Testament and New Testament in modern Greek pronunciation,
yes,
and it's great. But you've got the text in front of you, but if it's purely listening, I mean, we tried it, and it's not only a case of whether the listeners can understand, it's whether we can understand each other. It's also an issue. But I think also is what I said earlier, we're kind of on the way, I think at some stage we may just naturally transition into doing other, more authentic, quote unquote, ancient pronunciations or modern pronunciation. But I think more than anything, it's important just to get over the meta issues and just get into the hard work of just actually doing it, just actually read the text. I think a lot of people get distracted with meta issues and it's very tribalistic, people arguing about stuff, but just get on with the hard work of doing it. Choose whichever suits you and just enjoy it and get on with it.
Yeah. Well, Lee, I think we've been talking for about an hour already, and I want to respect your time for the rest of your day and stuff. But where can people find you? Like, where can they find your podcast? And how could they connect with you and what you're currently working on?
Oh yeah, so I'm not sure actually because I upload the podcast to Anchor. Is it? I think now it's Spotify for podcasts or something.
Oh yeah,
they've changed it. Yeah, I mean apparently it goes on to. I mean I've never used Spotify, but apparently it's there. Because it goes automatically. It's the great advantage of that. I mean, it's just what I use because I use Apple, Apple Podcasts. So it's either Spotify or Apple. I think it's called Apple Podcasts now.
Yeah.
So the podcast can be found there. It's just even. I mean, we just called it Ancient Greek Podcast because we just want it to be as obvious as possible. It's not the most original name, but yeah, that's what it is. Other than that, my blog, Hellenisdane, is it? It's a.
I'll put a link to it in the
WordPress. Yeah, it's WordPress. Okay, great. Yeah. And so those are the main things, and more than anything, I'd love to actually have people be inspired to do something similar and or interact. Like the moment is what I say. Why are my social medias in Greek? Because I'm just trying to engage with people who are doing similar stuff.
Yeah, well, that's great. Again, thank you so much for sitting down and taking the time to have this conversation. I think we've hit some really good points about, having community and motivation and, just producing and doing what you can to keep taking steps on that journey, and just recognizing too that everyone really is, everyone's on that journey, and they may be farther ahead or whatever, but it takes time, and just be patient and keep at it, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's patience and perseverance. I'm actually quite bad at languages. I'm just like, I'm patient and I persevere because I'm motivated. Because at least because I'm very interested in literature. So like, as long as it takes, I'm willing to struggle with the texts and do that. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely, it takes time. Yeah, it's like lifelong learning, they call it, right? It's
Yep.
not just finish a language then move on to another.
Yeah, it's true. Hmm. Well,
Yeah,
again,
I'd love.
Lee, yeah, thank you so much. And hopefully we can, we'll definitely I'll definitely put the notes in for your podcast and where people can find you, and maybe we can have you back and chat again sometime.
Yeah, anytime. Yeah, and get in touch with Joseph. He's on holiday at the moment, so but at some stage, get in touch with him.
Intro and outro music is Funky Thanksgiving by Admiral Bob, used with gratitude under a Creative Commons 3.0 attribution license. The track can be found at dig.ccmixer.org.